Hey people, this is Rania Zuleika hosting for University Collective for the talk series we have been conducting since days and Fight Against Your Freedom, which was named like that. So today here we have with us Mr. Cynthia Stephen from Bangalore, who's a Dalit activist, writer, and I guess social policy researcher and an independent journalist. She's from Bangalore. Welcome, ma'am, to the
Thank you. Thank you.
so I guess let me just go directly to the topic. That's what I guess. So we know caste discrimination has got a long history and politics, and hitherto people have been trying to oppose by many means, but now they are now pushed towards frustration and anger, and they're raising in rage. This is what is happening in one condition, but at the same time we have people bothering about heaping garbage as Valmiki communities on the street. So there is this two things going in parallel. So do you think this would be just another sensational topic for India?
I certainly hope not. I certainly hope that this will be the beginning of something, some big change. But I think up to now there have been a lot of these kind of violence which has gone unregarded. See, the Hathras case is not the only one. On the same day and subsequent days, other girls have also been attacked. But I think everybody's attention has been arrested by the fact that there has been a continued, even the two Unnao girls, no, where they burnt a girl who was running to the police station, or even that. But there also there was less response comparatively to what is happening in Hathras. It just means that things are changing rapidly on the ground. What changed between Unnao and Hathras is the question. And I think what has changed is that people have begun to realize that this is a pattern that is recurring in UP a lot. Compared to other states, the levels of violence in UP, that too against women, have skyrocketed in the past, particularly Dalits. And also the recent NCRB data came out in which it has shown that the violence recorded by the, registered, crimes registered in UP have gone up at the highest in the country. Of course, it's a very large state, but the numbers are way beyond the, either the geography or the population. So it has become, there is an increased level of anarchic, behavior in the state. The reason is the state itself. It is in the UP state is in the rule of a man who was not elected as the chief minister. Please understand this. When UP went to the polls, state government of UP went to polls, the state, the electorate went to polls for the state assembly elections. UP, this fellow Ajay Bisht was nowhere on the scene. The election was won as a strategy on Modi's record. Later on, they parachuted this so-called Yogi into power in UP by making him the CM. Tell me, if the people of UP had known that this man was going to be their CM, do you feel that BJP would have got so many votes? Did he have that much of credibility? He had already been known to have made very, very inflammatory comments against Muslim women in public. I want to repeat that. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. How can the the leaders of the BJP think of foisting this kind of a man who can make such inflammatory criminal, which are actually against the law, and nobody has proceeded against him legally? This kind of a man has been brought into the, what more can we expect except this? And in the past 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, we have seen severe killings, encounters, encounter deaths. The police have become worse than a mafia. And I think this has to be understood, that the state government, the leadership in the BJP leadership, state leadership in UP has been, that I don't think the people of UP deserve this kind of leadership.
Yeah, ma'am.
To the extent that in Gorakhpur, when there were local body elections in the year after he became, a few months after he became the CM, in his constituency, not even one ward member is a BJP candidate. That is the kind of support he's enjoying in his own Gorakhpur, where he has lived and worked for 20-30 years. And such a man is given power by the BJP to run the state. What more do you expect? I think this is also spilling over. It's not only about Dalits in this context. I feel we should understand that the communal temperature has gone up, the gender violence has gone up manyfold, and the state law and order missionary, far from being protector of law and order, has become a violator of law and order itself. This has to be seen in that context. So it's not just about Dalits, it's not about Valmikis, it's about the administration of this huge state of UP in the country.
Okay, ma'am. As it's clear about UP, but specifically speaking about Hathras case, like we have this idea of village being the soul of India, once suggested by Gandhi. Like, but villages has been long been a space of like caste violence as compared to urban spaces. That's what we can collect. I mean, what do you think about the spatial aspect of caste practice? Like, do you think urban mobility have been a major means that saved at least some people from caste violence?
Not some people, everybody who moved from those caste-ridden villages. I think Ambedkar had a much more, what to say, realistic picture of what villages are, because he was a person from the ground and had experienced, unlike Gandhi, who has never experienced caste discrimination in his life. So because he had always had an experience of having privilege, not only that, his family was very economically, socially, politically powerful. His father was, in a very important official in a princely state. So they did not have to face caste discrimination. They saw it happening to others. He was sensitized to it, and he used to oppose untouchability, no doubt. But this is how come the Dalits are untouchable, but they can be touched for rape. You see, so this untouchability is Gandhi. First of all, Gandhi's village ideal is a rosy picture and is not rooted in reality. Secondly, his approach to the caste question, basically to raise the issue of untouchability as the issue, totally is its internal weakness or contradiction is shown by the fact that it is the women among the untouchables who are the ones who are targeted for worst violence. Their bodies are very touchable. Their bodies are very attackable. So it is a flawed analysis. Therefore, we have no need to go into that. The fact is that there is casteism which continues in the villages, and what have got people to do there to the Dalits is getting less and less. So why should what holds people staying there for being treated in this manner? In this case, I think this girl's family owned some land, and she was helping her mother in the field when fruits of that land, they are denied. We know this, that if at all the land is allotted, it is the worst kind of land. Once they work very hard and make it productive, then somebody will go and grab it. So why? So I think many people have decided and moved to cities, mobility, to escape to certain extent. I wouldn't say that cities are also very caste friendly. They have their own way of displaying casteism. But yes, physical security is there, and at least some amount of economic mobility is there. So I think Dalits cities and towns have been a better place for.
Like, what are the legal aspects you think can work on to get away from the such caste violence in villages, like which are otherwise very rare in media coverage?
Please repeat the question.
What are the legal aspects to say? I mean, you think can work on to get away from these caste violence in villages?
Yeah. Well, the legal aspect is that it assumes that the local governments, as represented by the police stations in villages, they say, no, even in North India, the villages are known by the Thana. come under which police station Thana they come under. So it depends on how well that Thana Dar, that police officer, understands and implements his important role as the protector of the life and liberty of the people of that place, of that Thana. If he is joining the perpetrators and adding to the problem, things like Hathras will happen. Why the Thanedar, even the district magistrate, the collector of the district, he himself has been involved in threatening these people. And nothing, we don't know that any action has been taken against him for that. So the legal aspects is only as good as how well the people believe in it and implement it. And if they don't implement, what are the consequences they face? I have already made the point that the government itself has moved towards lawlessness and anarchy. So I don't understand. I mean, basically, there's a wholesale dismantling of rule of law in UP in general, and definitely in Hathras district in particular.
Now, if you are taking issues on the ground level, like to take an example, land is a major issue that keeps oppressed caste people subjugated to the upper caste in villages. So, how are they planning on raising land issues and as a solution?
You see, land, I don't know what, when you say land issue, it's not just one issue. It's just, it cannot, many things come under this. You see, access to land, ownership of land, then, having the capacity to use it for agriculture, where it is located. So there are many things. And as I've just earlier, I was saying, even ownership of land in this family, in this case, the family did own land. You see, there is a huge issue where ownership of any kind of property and Dalits are concerned. I want to remember here the Kairlanji family, the family from Kairlanji, the Botmange family, in which the mother and daughter were severely raped and murdered, and the two boys of the family were also raped, were also killed. And though it is a caste murder, though it is a caste atrocity, the court refused to see it as a caste atrocity and gave a judgment that it was a land dispute. But I know, I have worked with a group in Madurai called Evidence, which has a huge, it makes it a job to basically track atrocity cases. And by name itself, we can make out Evidence. And they have put out a very big report on atrocity cases against Dalit women in Tamil Nadu. 100% of the cases of women rape and murder are linked to land struggles. We have to think of what is the reason. The reason is our society, traditionally, it follows Manuvadi system, an unequal system of justice. And in Manu, it says that these outcasts are not supposed to live in proper houses, and they're not supposed to have their own property. They should not cook in metal vessels. They should cook only in clay vessels. They should not wear new clothes. They should be treated as dehumanized as possible. That is why whenever you see there is an atrocity in a village against caste, if in that colony, they said, even the government makes separate colony for Dalits and houses, gives Ashraya house, this house, that house, Indira Gandhi Awas Yojana. Everybody, the Harijan gets a Harijan, still called a Harijan colony. Anyway, in many villages I've seen, there is a Harijan colony only. And the government gives some housing. And those people work hard. They'll buy one scooter. They will buy one TV. They'll have one wet grinder in the house. These fellows, first thing they will do whenever they are attacking a Dalit. So I think that is the thing. The fact is that the society cannot accept the economic mobility of the Dalits. They want them always to be enslaved. Even when Ambedkar was there, that was the issue. He used to say, dress neatly, dress decently to the women. Why? Because in the past, the tradition was Dalit women are not supposed to dress neatly with clean clothes. They have to be in dirty clothes. You have to be a dehumanized body. Only then you will be accepted. You wear new clothes, you are targeted. Jealousy. They don't want to see us as humans. That is the thing. So from there, from whether possessing new clothes or possessing, utensils in the house, what kind of utensils you use, what kind of house you live in, what kind of property you will own, everything is made because they have no right according to the system. The slaves have no right to own property. You have to their caste superiors have a right to take it away from them. They have no right to retain it. You can check the manuscript if I'm wrong. There are people who say all this is false. This was all addition. Whatever addition or not, are we not following that system now? Whether it's not the text, what is entered into social life and practice. That is the Manusmriti I'm talking about, not one text which is found somewhere in somebody's library. We are talking about a Manuvadi mindset, which is to this day being operating in our life. Whether it is women, they say a woman has no, is unworthy of freedom. That's why we have child marriage. That's why we have honor killing. That's why the girl is not allowed to choose who she wants to marry. So that is Manuvadi system. And the caste violence is also linked to what the Manuvadi practices have been that have entered into society.
So what I could collect from, hello?
Feel unless we address this relationship, this Manuvadi approach of inequality and injustice to the deprived and marginalized, there is no solution to it in the next 5 years. No, it will take some time. We have to, everybody has to, there has to be a government in the long term which has the political will to stand and assert the restoration of human rights and dignity of the citizens here who are marginalized. Only then, that will take some time. We have to work towards it in a systematic manner.
As I could gather from your words, that it's not about land or anything, it's about the fundamental relation. So people have been suggesting about separate settlements. I mean, I see activists, Dalit activists suggesting for separate settlements for them. So any comments on that?
See, even now there are separate settlements in villages for Dalits, right?
Very, I mean, to make it little more.
Has it worked? No, we cannot. We don't want to have separate settlements. We want to be in the mainstream. We don't want separate settlements. Let everybody accept us. Why should we withdraw and go into a corner so that they can attack us, do economic blockade, cut our power? No, we have every right to stay where we are and assert our right where we are. I don't believe in this. We are very widely scattered. All that is an excuse. I agree with that, but I don't think that that is a serious long-term solution. No, because many things can go wrong with that. We're seeing it. We're seeing it all the time.
Yeah. So Dalit movements have always
because the simple reason is you will further become isolated. You will further become target. You become more. You attract more talent. Attract more violence. And the thing is, you are always in a position of weakness outside that little territory. We can't have that. We have to be strong where we are.
So, yeah, coming to another one. I mean, the same thing. Dalit movements have always been revolving around the idea of constitutional morality for a long time. Like, we feel like protecting the constitution becomes the sole responsibility of Dalits or any other minority to say for that matter. But taking into account like Khatras or any other Dalit atrocities since independence, the constitution fails to safeguard our rights and lives in many ways to an extent. So, do you think all these history of atrocities propagate us to invent some new methodologies to fight these caste atrocities?
How has the constitution failed? The constitution has not failed. The implementers of the constitution have failed us. The people who have not implemented the constitution, have not given us our rights, have not been held to account. We need to hold these fellows to account. Not only that, where is the representative democracy we enjoy? We have people who get elected and get in. But who are those people who are getting elected, whether MP or MLA? How many, what is the percentage of women in the society? How many women are in the assembly? How many in parliament? So, and how many Dalits? We say, okay, there are Dalit reserved seats for Dalits, so we have some Dalit representatives. But are they representing only Dalits? Did they win only with Dalit votes? No, they won with general category votes. So that is a system deliberately made so that Dalit vote cannot get consolidated. That is why also I oppose the idea of separate settlement. Again, the same thing. Okay, you are there, so you don't have any right to get any reservation anywhere else. Don't you realize that will happen? See, you can say, okay, like for instance, I'll give you a simple example. This is how people think. So there are buses in Bangalore which had only 2 seats in front for ladies. All the entire bus otherwise were for men. So, I mean, general seats, but men will sit. The ladies' seats only flew. But there will be so many office goers in the going in the bus, all the ladies in the bus, and only 2 seats for them in front. Then women troubled and said, no, no, no. So then they made half the seats for, after a long time, some years back, some 10 years back, okay, half the front seats are reserved for women. If reservation is there, you stay in that corner, don't come here. You understand? So anyone who's in a position of power can dictate what will happen. Even in such a context. So it's not like that. Everyone should have equal access and equal power. And if they are marginalized, they should be given an access, an enabling environment to be able to enjoy that access. That is the way we need to focus and work.
Yeah. So I've been going through many of your arguments. Like it's something mere. It's not about mere activism. It's something to real politics. We have to come in. But there is another reality where people are coming into politics, but they are given seats where there is more chance to lose, or that type of what to say, discrimination is still working in the practical level. So, as someone very pessimistic, what is that they have to look upon? I mean,
that's a very important way in which politics can be can control, and I have personally had knowledge about that, where if there's a good chance for a woman from a minority community to win, they will see that the ticket, she will only be given a losing ticket, a place where the party is weak. So this is the weakness of party politics, no doubt about it. But I think if more women become vocal and active in public life, I think this can be tackled adequately. Women also are like a silent, group, silent sleeping giants. Women, if all the women get together and become active, if all the Dalits come together and become active, and I think the other weakness is also very much a structural one, and that is, this depending on other votes, general category votes for Dalit political leadership to win. The idea of which actually originated in the Roundtable Conference, and which was actually in practice. No, it didn't originate in the Roundtable Conference. It was actually in practice in India, the double vote. So then you elect, Dalits were given a chance to elect from their own community and also for a general vote. So they have a dual vote system. And that would have really built a lot of, and it's not only for Dalits, it was there for a number of, I think even Muslims and Christians had that access in the earlier days, when there was under the Viceroy, there was an Indian constitution, and at that time. So that was picked up by the Roundtable Conference, and that is why Ambedkar was asking for a dual vote system, which of course, as we know, Gandhi again played a very, very important role in ensuring that that does not happen. But I believe that that is the way to go, that a dual vote needs to be given not only to Dalits, even maybe to Adivasis, in where there is a mixed population. So that there is, because all the political parties are in the hands of powerful landed caste men. By saying landed caste men, I include backward class. That is, Yadavs are there, Reddis are there, and in Tamil Nadu, the local caste elites are in the power in political parties. So to counter that, the only way to ensure that representative candidates are chosen to the House, to the Assembly, and to Parliament is to make it possible for people from all categories to contest. Even the reservation that we have is, as I said, has this weakness. So the dual vote system would really help a lot in consolidating the political power of the marginalized sections very seriously. I want to, for instance, talk about the tea garden workers in Assam, because they were brought 200 years ago to Assam from central Indian tribes. So they are actual Adivasis from Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. But in Assam, they are not counted as tribes because of their identity. But they are a very large population, and they are contributing very seriously to the economy of the state. But the Assamese people don't accept them as full Assamese citizens. This is a reality. So if they got a chance, and 200 years they've been there, how much more you want that they are locals? Okay, and they're working there, no? They're living and working there for generations. Still you want to deny their political representation and their identification. If they got a vote to choose their own leaders, how much of a positive thing it will be. I'm just using it as an example. It's not that I'm against the Assamese or anything. It's not like that. Everybody has a right to assert their identities and all that, but they have to give space for everybody else also. That has to be done. So these local issues, they need to be worked out in a very consistent manner. In the earlier days, the linguistic division took place of the states. Now it is a more, the identities have evolved even more. So I think we need to think carefully about how to enable better quality representation in the in people's and distribution of decision making processes and power. So I think we need to go through this process at every level. Like Kashmir is another issue. There also they have, it's also about the problem is between locals and the settlers. So we really need to think about it. And even in Adivasi dominated areas, there are people who come from outside. So so these are all vexed issues. We haven't as a country, as a nation, we haven't sat and thought about how to sort these matters out and take every side into important, listen and try to give voice to the marginalized and the silence. It has always been this majoritarian forces which are working, whether it is the Congress party or it is generated by some other force. Maybe it's caste majority force. So like this, or a tribal section. So we really need to know about how to handle these diversities in a more constructive and evolved manner. We need to evolve our understanding on this better.
So, ma'am, we have Baba Sahib who fought the Brahmanism as well as patriarchy on the other side. And then we have these mainstream feminists who want to make everything about them. I mean, when we just go back to our talk itself, we have been addressing Gandhi. Like whenever we talk about Ambedkar, we have this Gandhi as an obstacle. So, how do you see this appropriation of these movements by the upper caste liberals?
See, it's true. It's true that the feminism, the women in Indian feminism have done a lot in asserting women's rights. But I think their analysis has been flawed. Just as caste was the lack of analysis of caste was more or less a very important factor in the marginalization of the left parties in Indian politics. The lack of analysis of caste in the women's movement has been the result has been the depoliticization of the women. women's movements in India. And that is why you still feel still only a few people are there who are talking this. When we were younger and talked about this, they say, no, you don't understand. We are talking about Dalit women also. But why don't you listen to Dalit women? Why don't you let Dalit women speak? This is our, this is a point earlier also. And so, yeah, you're right. They try to appropriate the voice and space. I think now, after 20-25 years of raising this issue, now there is some acknowledgement by them that they have made a tactical error and there is a need for them to be more open. Not all, some are doing that. Some are still wanting to be the spokespeople for everybody. But I think we've successfully challenged that in many ways.
Okay.
The point is this: it's not that they'll say that we have been speaking, but the point is it's not about your speaking, it's about your accepting the leadership of us as leaders. You do accept us as equal leaders? Yes, that's fine. If not, we have our own space. We don't need you to champion our cause. If you want, you have to come with us, you have to walk with us, but you have to allow us to build our perspective and walk and accept our perspectives and walk with us.
Coming back to the resistance, I mean, at the time when the language of resistance has been redefined, like, what do you suggest in the process of Dalit mobilization beyond activism, in the light of Phulan Devi's act of resistance, as well as Azad doing comment on the needs of gun possession for protection? So, what's your comment on that?
I don't believe that, just as I said, separate settlement is not a solution. I don't believe anything can be settled by guns. Nothing. They only make matters worse. I've yet to see any problem sorted out by the use of guns or violence. No. The only option for us is to become effective and active in public life, in advocating our own views, and in promoting everybody's welfare, not only our own welfare. We should be seen not only as our advocating for our own cause, but advocating for the cause of everybody's good. And constitutional values should be our basis. I don't at all support this idea of it can only it's a recipe for disaster, because the power equations at the ground level are so different. I don't believe anything to do with guns will ever solve such a sensitive and vexed issue involving human lives and property. No way.
Now, coming back to this Hathras incident, we got to know that Advocate Seema, who fought for Nirbhaya, will be defending in Manisha's case. So, you could ask what justice really means then. I mean, because in mainstream imagination, all it takes about is a need for capital punishment. So,
sorry, mainstream?
So in mainstream imagination, all it talks about is the need for capital punishment when it comes to justice, right? So how do you, what do you think about that?
Yeah, see, on 10th of October is is a World Day Against Capital Punishment, and I'm going to be anchoring an international discussion on that against capital punishment. And I think that capital punishment is not a humane option at all, at any cost, even if it is for the rape, the aggravated rape of a Dalit woman or a minor like Asifa or Nirbhaya, Jyoti Singh. I am a person who has been firmly, I know a lot of women advocate capital punishment for rape, and I know the law has been changed to include that. Earlier it used to be the maximum punishment was 7 years. Now it has been, and for aggravated rape, I think they add some more years. But now they have also included capital punishment. I don't know whether it's a good idea, because even after having that on the statute, rapes have continued. So what's the point? Is it effective? No, obviously, if the solution is if the problem is caused due to the social practices or political realities, then the solution necessarily has to be from the social side and the political side. The society cannot afford to take the position of an executioner.
Yeah.
This is our position. And I know it will be unpopular, and many right-wing women, and even some of the feminists, some feminist women from privileged groups, they have advocated it. But no, we are firmly, in principle, opposed to the capital punishment. Life imprisonment, definitely yes, without hope of release, should be there as the real strong thing. And they should not be even they give parole. No, even parole should not be given to them. They should be behind bars, and they should be given an opportunity to give restitution to the society for what they have done. You employ them usefully and take them as human beings, but only behind bars. They should not come out. This is what I would prescribe.
Coming back to state's approach, once it was told that there did not exist such a rape. I mean, rape did not happen. It was first told. Am I audible?
No, say that again.
Yeah, so I'm taking the question back to state's approach towards this, because the first thing the narration was like there wasn't any rape. It was only physical attack, and then later now it is coming up like some outside conspiracy related to the Muslims who visited, and they had been taken under sedition cases. So how do you look forward to the acceptance of these stories by the public consciousness? So when some kind of like
who believes this? Who believes this?
yeah, but I see a lot of I mean the acceptance by the public consciousness, I mean the normal citizens.
I'll repeat that. The girl has given a dying testimony, which is admissible as evidence in court. It's conclusive evidence. Whatever anybody says, the evidence exists. I don't think that anyone will believe. Nobody will believe. No, sane human being, even a child, will not believe this account that there was no rape and that there was some sedition. This is rubbish. This is nothing. It's only discrediting the government attempts. And so therefore, I think there is, and more than anything, there is the girl's dying declaration, which is admissible in evidence in the court. More than that, there is nothing else required to convict these fellows. So is the government willing to take this forward and convict the fellows or not? Their political will, or are they going to defend the indefensible? If they defend the indefensible, then it just shows that they're unworthy of being there in government and holding the reins of power. They're unworthy. No child even will believe any of this nonsense. And even if the media is, there's also this whole thing about, okay, the family knew each other, they were phoning each other 100 times. So what? Does it still mean that there is full evidence that usually rape takes place among people who know the girl, in the surroundings? It only reinforces it rather than excludes it. So there has been long-term history of conflict, and it is quite possible that those fellows are phoning the girl's brother and threatening her. Not that they're threatening them or whatever, intimidating them, whatever it is, the girl's dying declaration is there as solid, admissible evidence. Is there political will to convict or not? We want to see that. The whole world is watching. That is the answer.
Yeah, so you say that they are failing themselves. And let me conclude. I know you are that much hopeful because your words were clear, precise, but still, how hopeful are you?
Very hopeful. Very hopeful because of young people like you coming into the discourse. Up to now, I've been a lone voice, actually, I would say. And a few handful, maybe 5 or 7 women across the country were raising, apart from a few younger students and all that. It is now that I'm hopeful because I feel that the larger society has woken up, not only Dalits, not only Bahujans, but even people from all walks of life, even the privileged communities, young men are coming. This is what I've always been saying. To address the gender inequalities, It is not a woman's issue, it is a society's issue, and men can be part of the solution. Right now, even their silence makes them part of the problem. In the same way, those who are privileged by caste, unless they become a part of the fight for against caste discrimination, this is not a battle that can be won easily. But I believe that it will happen, because now, slowly and steadily, people are finding the way to speak up and join the forces for good.
So yeah, I need to end this in a hopeful note. Thank you so much for joining. And yeah, your time was precious and you took time for us. And thank you so much. Let the fight go on and let's see where it is.
Yes, all work together.